Hello, folks, and welcome back, most of you. And for you who are new here, I'm Nick. I have been a union rep for over 30 years, and local, regional, and national negotiator. I put a few years in the European Parliament as a documents analyst. And my main focus is labor law. But for the last couple of weeks, I've been watching the Zachariah Anderson-Trial, where he alleged to have stalked his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend, and then allegedly have murdered the new boyfriend, which you all should know by now. Today, the jury has been sent home for the night for so they will continue their deliberations tomorrow. And I thought I would use a bit of my and your time to talk a little bit about the prosecutions and the defense closing arguments. As you might know, yesterday I made a mock closing argument, and well, I believe it holds up as a decent one, with the exception that I have one factual error that I have to address to you, and that is the expert with the state's lab techs that testified. The first one alleged that, or testified that it was, in her opinion, that the famous needlepin smudge was blood. And when the second lab tech came in to peer review that opinion, he said that he couldn't because it wasn't in the report, which means she said that outside of her notes and outside of the report. So there was nothing to peer review. But in his opinion, it is most likely blood. He couldn't exclude other things, but most likely. So that was the disagreement, not the DNA. So the disagreement about the DNA is from the last witness of the state. When Mr. Guterres was to be put in the missing persons file, they couldn't put in a whole DNA profile. This is, as I remember, and I have gone back to watch it, and that seems to be the case. Now to the prosecution's closing argument, and we will watch a bit of it here, and I will point out a few things about it that I find a bit problematic. Let's go here.
And I say that because there are two things that happen. One, there is a bloody, bloody scene. A scene that has pools of blood that I'm going to talk about a little more in a second. But also, there are the circumstances of Rosalío Gutiérrez's absence from the life of everyone he cared about and who cares about him. Rosalío's phone shows he gets home at about 9:08 p.m. He's just dropped his kids off back at their mom's. He's expecting Naridia Macias. Her last text to him is at 9:37 p.m., and that text is never answered.
Now, the first thing he says is pools of blood. And there is, as far as I can see from the crime scene photos, it's only one pool of blood. And this will be brought up a bit later as well. And with the state, the prosecutor's closing argument, claiming that this was a blitz attack from what he alleges Zach Anderson did. But my issue there is if this was this blitz attack, then this supposed pool of blood, that amount of blood, who I still say is, I doubt it is enough to actually kill a person, to bleed out at one and the same spot to form that pool. That takes some time, which in my opinion is inconsistent with the prosecutor's argument that this blitz attack, as they claim. Let's go further into the testimony about other things that I find problematic with the prosecution's closing arguments.
Experiences with his children. He was a father whose daughter had a little love note to dad on the pillow when she left. He was a father whose son shared his love of baseball and emulated him in every way he could in that love. And all of that has been gone for every day since May 17th, 2020. So combined with that bloody scene, you as a jury know he was murdered. You know that because those two things together show you that he is gone. So you know that there is a quantity of blood and a magnitude of blood in this case, which certainly tells that story. There is blood pooled on the floor by the couch. There's blood pooled on the couch itself. There's blood sprayed on wall after wall and on the ceiling in multiple areas and on almost every surface of his main room and the hallway by his door.
I'm playing this in 1.5, by the way, to cut down some time. Here again, you hear about a pool of blood on the floor, which, and a pool of blood on the couch. Now, here's my issue with those statements. That doesn't indicate to me a blitz attack. That it is both a pool of blood on the couch and a pool of blood on the floor. If it's a blitz attack, there wouldn't be enough time, in my opinion, to form pools of blood on two separate places. I'm still not sure about one place, and two separate places seems more improbable, in my opinion. Let's continue.
There is a quantity and magnitude of blood which is absolutely consistent with Rosalio Gutierrez being murdered there at his own apartment. And every bit of that blood that's been tested in those different areas all come back to the DNA of Mr. Gutierrez himself.
Again, I have to say that when he talked about sprayed on every surface of the living room, according to the crime scene photos, there are some spray consistent with blunt force trauma on a select few places on the wall. And if you follow the trial and saw the crime scene photos, you know that they had to go up pretty close to see those blood spatter. So his claim that, as the prosecution also did during their opening statement, that it was more or less a scene from The Shining. The prosecution's words does not go together with the crime scene photos. Let's continue.
So that quantity of blood and his absence from any contact, any social media, any financial records, any of the people who care about him, any phones, any in-person contact, all of that is gone over those 1,039.
Now, that depends on how credible you find the witnesses. Yes, he didn't use his normal phone or something like that. And his mother testified she hadn't heard from him. But again, as I said on a previous, that might have been on Legal Vice's stream, that the more I find out about this case, the more I believe that Mr. Guterres got an horrific beatdown. And he owed money to people. He had children with multiple baby mamas and owed alimony on the north of $500 every month. So he was in some financial dire. And then you also have him supposedly being in a relationship with Sadie Beecham. At least she believed they were in a relationship. But then again, there were testimony from two women who he tried to hook up with during that relationship Miss Beecham thought they had. To me, that doesn't seem like Mr. Guterres was that serious. But all things together tells me that nobody, in my opinion, not enough blood, financial dire, tells me that he might as well have skipped town. And at least one of the state witnesses is not truthful. If it is the mother, if it is Sadie, I don't care. But it is, in my opinion, equally probable that he skipped town, as if someone managed to kill him and dump the body somewhere. And by that, I don't even include Zachariah Anderson in that, because in my opinion, there were quite a few people with equal or better motive to wanting to hurt Mr. Guterres. And you shouldn't point fingers, at least if you are in the trial. But to me, in this trial, Miss Beecham testified that Mr. Anderson cheated on her on multiple occasions. Now imagine she being in a new relationship, or she thought she was in a relationship with Mr. Guterres. And he apparently is a serial cheater. Now, she testified that she didn't know. But that goes to credibility. I'm not so sure she was totally honest about that. But let's get back to the closing arguments.
Days, and so we know and can say as a legal conclusion that a reasonable jury will find that he is murdered. The blood and his absence both tell us that story. So what else do we know about this crime based on the evidence that's been presented in this case? And I want to suggest to you first that the next obvious and real conclusion is that this is a highly planned, thought out, and executed crime of murder.
Highly planned and thought out and executed murder. And this by Mr. Anderson with the dirtiest work van, a hoarder home, who brings allegedly his daughter to look into windows, multiple witnesses to his actions with text and so. I don't connect that with the mastermind criminal the prosecution puts him out to be.
And so I want you to think about who there is in this case who has shown a propensity, right? Who has shown day after day in the conduct that we have outlined patterns of that sort of planning, that sort of obsessive conduct, that sort of refusal to follow any of the limits and rules that most of us would govern ourselves and who we are willing to use to accomplish our goals in our lives.
How about those two guys who, after they called the cops, went out to Mr. Anderson to have a discussion, but they were never looked at all? Nothing. As far as I can see, they didn't check their phone records, they didn't check their GPS data, nothing. Even though it is in testimony that one of them threw away a rug. He claims because it was full of pee, but then again, they didn't check it out.
So when I say who, I mean, of course, the defendant, right? Because here's what we know about him in terms of other things happening in the very few weeks that we have a glimpse of his overwhelming, out of control, no limits jealousy towards any new love life for his ex, Sadie Beecham.
Yes, there are some problematic texts and stuff, but no limit. Nah. You have to remember, and I said this in my mock closing, that his so-called obsession with Mr. Guterres started around the same time Mr. Anderson discovered that his ex-girlfriend Sadie Beecham abandoned the kids to go to Mexico and drink. Now, tell me one dad wouldn't be upset about that.
What are those pieces of evidence I'm suggesting are signs of an obsessed planner that are the signature of this crime of murder? Well, one, this is unchallenged evidence in this case in the record.
I need to cut that bit out, but the prosecution doxed the daughter again. This asshole prosecutor seems to, if you're talking about having no limits, he doesn't give two shits on a straw about the daughter. He says her name over and over again in this trial.
I'm sorry, the daughter tells you that her father had conceived a plan with her. And it is a truly sinister plan of having there be a day when Sadie had brought the boys and the daughter over to visit their dad. And then when they figured out that Sadie was gone to visit her new love life, then those children would be returned. And when those children would be returned, the daughter would make a call to her father saying, fraudulently, falsely, well, I don't know where mom is, we are abandoned. And then he would falsely save the day. He would report this. She would be a child neglect mom because of the false information and the horrible use of an 11-year-old girl.
Also a credibility phase, and we already know that the daughter had one story in the first interview, and then instead of having one interviewer specialized in interviewing children, she was interviewed by different cops, by the prosecutor himself. And over time, her story changed to what you heard on the stand. And she was impeached, not in person, but she claimed her father never wore Levi's. She was very adamant about that. He was arrested with a pair of Levi's. That and other things that is inconsistent with the testimony she gave in directly after Mr. Anderson. Well, even before Mr. Anderson was arrested. Her testimony changed considerably.
aren't going to remain out and about, I would suggest it is not an accident. So what happens? Well, the first thing we know is that in that hallway of Rosalio's apartment, the blood tells a story. And I'm going to suggest to you a reasonable thought process for you is it tells a story of a blitz attack in that hallway.
Here we go with a blitz attack. This is the first time in this trial this theory is presented. It's the first time. Nobody has testified to this. None of the lab techs, none of the officers at the scene, none of them have testified to what the prosecution is putting forward right now. And it's a smart move, because if that was presented at trial, it could have been contested with other testimony, with the calling experts. Much of this, what the prosecution is about to say, could have been heavily contested during the trial. But since this is a closing argument, both parties have freedom, because this is not considered evidence. This is the part where the prosecution and the defense is supposed to condense what their case in chief is, to present an overall theory that has already been presented, in my opinion. But let's continue.
Someone hiding, ringing a doorbell, probably having no idea that Rosalio is expecting company, right? And so is a person.
No testimony from any neighbor said that there was a ringing of any doorbell in that apartment complex. No neighbors testified to it. Nobody. But here we are. Here we go.
Who's going to be prone to open the door, but it is going to be somebody who Rosalio doesn't know, because you're not going to blitz that person in the hallway and cause all that blood. If you...
all that blood. There is in the hallway, there are blood smudges on the inside and outside of the door. There might be a droplet or 5 in the hallway. There has been no testimony if it's supposed to be an artery spatter or anything, but let's continue.
You know him, you're going to be inside. You're going to figure out a way inside to get yourself into a more private location. So it's going to be someone who will not be welcome and who you don't know. Rosalio doesn't know. And so you know from the evidence in this case that there are at least 2 blows, blunt force trauma blows. A hard object hitting Rosalio Gutierrez in a way that makes him bleed. And not only makes him bleed, but makes his blood fly into the air to hit doors. And you know that when that blood flies, that door in the hallway is open. So Rosalio...
That has not been testified to. There has been testified to smudge of blood on the outside of the door, not blood spatter.
Has not yet managed to go back in or to close that door when he is first attacked. And so that is the blitz attack that evidence leads you to. Remember that Officer Van Wee told you that he knows that door was still open at some of the points that the blunt force trauma blows are happening, because there's blood on the interior of the entry part of the door. And
that cop testified to a smudge, not blood spatter.
When that door is closed, that either in the hallway or inside, that part of the door would not be exposed.
Now, I claim this is more consistent with my theory of Mr. Gutierrez being suffered a severe beatdown, waking up after it, sitting in the couch or the sofa, and then walking off, opening the door, closing the door. That would explain the smudges on both sides of the door.
So you know there's a blitz attack, and you know there's a couple of blows that happen out there, and then you know whoever is the attacker, the defendant in this case, the planner.
Whoever is the attacker. Freudian slip.
Needs to get himself in that apartment. And why is that? Well, he needs to get himself in there because two neighbors, at least, may start to hear a ruckus. Right?
Those two neighbors, I believe there was also changes in testimony from what they told the cops when they were asked in direct relations to the alleged crime happening, and after the district attorney, after they visited the district attorney, all of a sudden their testimony changed. But this district attorney does not record his interviews, so nobody knows.
Right? A neighbor, when she is talked to in some detail, when it's not just a cursory sort of canvas, but when she's talked to in some detail, says after 9 or around 9, I hear a scream in the hallway of pain and surprise at a time period right around May 17th.
That's his interpretation of the testimony. It's not verbatim.
Marissa Swanigan testified, told you, between 10 and 11 on May 17th, I heard a loud banging for about 5 minutes against my living room wall. Something big was forced up against the wall.
Remember, this is after the prosecution claims that Mr. Guterres already had been blown with a blunt force object that causes blood to spatter everywhere. Yet there is not a single crime scene photo that shows that a bloody man has been forced up against the wall. Nothing of that sort.
Now the defendant knows that he's got to hurry, okay? The blunt force trauma attack to get Rosalio Gutierrez in a position where he can be killed, that blunt force attack has to be finished as quickly and efficiently as possible because the defendant has no idea whether someone will come any moment soon. All of his preparation needs to be hurried. And so there are continuing blows. There's another blow now on the inside at the door that is a blunt force trauma. Again, blood flies onto the wall, onto part of the ceiling. Over by the dining room table, so a few steps further into the apartment. Over on the wall over there, there's a table over there, and that also has a blow that is suffered right by it. And then there are additional blows at that table right at the entryway, and then another blow at the couch. These are all blunt force trauma blows. And Officer Van Wee said conservatively there have to be at a minimum 6 of those based on their locations and the differing blood that has splashed and spattered onto the blinds and all those surfaces and the ceiling and the wall.
Now, at least 6 blows. Now that would take account not just blows to the head or maybe somewhere else, but that doesn't say that Mr. Guterres died from it. Just that he was bleeding, which would, in my opinion, account for the amount of blood on the floor and on the couch, consisted with him being battered, waking up later, sits up, bleeds a bit more on the couch, and then leaves.
6 blows of attack. But
soon there will come something you will like, I promise. Well, maybe not, but it will be interesting.
Blunt force trauma is not an efficient way to end someone's life, right? You can immobilize someone, maybe they'll die eventually. It is not an efficient way to quickly end someone's life.
Bullshit. Repeatedly banging someone with a blunt force object can kill quite fast. It's just that the amount of blood doesn't support that theory for the prosecution. And here it comes to the part where their snitch effed up by claiming Mr. Anderson said he stabbed Mr. Guterres, which there are no testimony that says any of the spatters shown in the apartment is from a stab wound or anything with a sharp object.
So I'd suggest to you that the rest of the evidence in this case is certainly consistent with someone then changing.
I hate the word consistent. I really do, because it sounds better than it actually is. there are some examples of things that are consistent. For instance, releases of AC/DC albums with plane crashes. It has nothing to do with each other, but the graphs are consistent with each other. That's how weak that word is as an argument, in my opinion.
Weapons. And one of the things we know is that at least the handle of the object that was the blunt force trauma instrument, right? Whether it's a bat or an axe with a wooden handle, whatever, some kind of hammer with a wooden handle, whatever.
They don't have a murder weapon. That's what he's saying. There's a bat missing from Mr. Gutierrez's apartment, but they don't have a murder weapon, so they don't know.
First blunt force trauma object is. We know that there's such magnitude of blows, such force, whatever, that wood shatters. You know that the blows being administered to Rosalio Gutierrez eventually shatter that wood.
They found some wood shattering. So, well, we agree on something.
Because there's a shard of that wood that you see that has hair of Rosalio Gutierrez on it and the blood of Rosalio Gutierrez on it. Literally something that certainly seems like impacted his head, right? And there are other shards of wood found at other locations, right? On the couch, there's a couple of shards of wood. So we know that particular weapon got busted. And so
not necessarily. There can be splinters from wood missing. And even if that would, so as the prosecution says, that would destroy the weapon. Well, what do you have there? What do you have then? You have a sharp wooden object. Wouldn't you?
Some new weapon likely was employed. And I'd suggest to you a knife or a sharp object makes perfect sense. There's arterial spray, which is something that
not testify to arterial spray.
Happens if you puncture an artery, which a sharp object will efficiently do for you and cause a spray. Not the same blunt force trauma splashes and spatters and stains, but a different one. And often if you stab someone in their vital organs, because it's close to them, and if they're down and not fighting anymore, all you will have is blood flow and the drips and draining of their life out of their body. And so there would be no other and distinct evidence of this murder when you turn to the knife. And when you finish Rosalio Gutierrez, because he no longer in any way, shape, or form is able to fend off any blows. You have to hurry. People have already heard a little bit of a ruckus. You have to hurry. You have to finish him. And so you finish him and maybe get a little arterial spray, some blood drips. Your plan, the defendant's plan, was to make it look like he disappeared. And so he was going to stage this in a way that made it look like maybe this is a disappearance.
I'm as bored as Mr. Anderson is here. But let's continue.
And eventually people would figure that out, but that would buy some time, right? It's a Sunday night. This guy might be working in the morning. People might be coming over to his house first thing in the morning.
Wasn't Mr. Anderson supposed to be a master planner? And all of a sudden, he's not anymore.
How am I buying time would be your first plan. And so you are trying to create a plan.
I'm not sure a first plan for a master criminal to go in, beat the living hell out of Mr. Gutierrez. Why isn't the first plan to get out of there as fast as possible?
The defendant, the planner, is saying, I'm going to try to stage this, but there's just so much blood, folks. And he's got to hurry. So he grabs up the wood pieces he can grab, but he misses one or two, right? He straightens up a couple of pieces.
If he was supposed to pick up stuff, there would be traces of, because if someone is bleeding to that extent and the bat is shattered or splinters of it, then you have blood on you, that would show that someone tried to pick up stuff.
The furniture that either fell over or got, repositioned as Rosalio Gutierrez is staggering, or maybe even, trying somehow to fend some blows off. Those moments of quick staging occur. You had an idea already, and so you fall.
So was he laying down, immobile, or was he moving around?
Follow through on taking his credit cards and his phone. You don't want to leave with those.
Why not? why stage them at all? If you are moving the body, why do you stage the credit cards? And by the way, there was a smudge of blood on a credit card, according to testimony. They tested it for DNA, and it was not Mr. Anderson's.
You are afraid that those leaving might give some clue to where you've gone next, right? But if you hide them in the freezer, the battery will die quick, and there's a high likelihood that at least for a period of time, if somebody doesn't have their phone present, if somebody doesn't have their credit cards present, maybe they just left, right? So you
And still, all the cops that went through that apartment did not check the kitchen. That seems very unlikely, to hide a phone in the freezer.
your half attempt to stage a disappearance, the defendant still chose to follow through on. Of course, the problem is there's just so much blood. And this staged disappearance will not allow you to leave that area rug, which is so saturated with blood, that some of that blood, before it was moved, has already spilled off into a larger pool that remains on the side of where that rug was. But what do? You take his glasses, because if a guy disappears, of course he takes his glasses. You take his boots, right, a pair of his shoes. You take some footwear, because of course if somebody disappears, they took that.
Yeah.
So you take some basics to make sure you've staged it, but you got to take the rug. And you've brought supplies to be ready for this, right? You have made sure that you're going to minimize any kind of problems you'll have in your van and all that, but you didn't bargain for that much blood on the rug.
Master criminal and planner and everything. Well, if you haven't seen someone bleed a lot, you really don't know how much blood it will become. But then again, the only evidence of Mr. Anderson buying garbage bags are 13-gallon garbage bags. And this is a 270-pound man, over 6 feet tall. Yeah, I'm having issues with this.
And so you've figured out how you're going to transport him over. I don't know if you're using a tool or if you're just lifting him yourself, whatever way you are moving.
A tool. There are no evidence of a tool as a carrier or anything like that. And Mr. Anderson lifting a 270-pound man in a bloody rug without leaving drag marks or driplets or anything anywhere in the apartment or in the hallway. Remember, there are no traces of Mr. Anderson being in that apartment, and yet the prosecution claims he did all this without leaving any trace anywhere under a blitz attack while he was in a hurry.
Moving a body that you've planned for, the body of Rosalio Gutierrez, wrapped in a rug, utilizing the duct tape and the rope that you brought, that your own daughter said was down in your basement when she...
A rug, duct tape, and rope to get a 270-pound bloody mess without leaving a trace. Sure.
She left on this very same weekend. Using those supplies, you are leaving. But when you take this unwieldy, dead man, when you take him and you place him in the very back of your van.
See what he skipped there? He skipped how he got from inside the apartment to the van without leaving a trace.
Rosalio Gutierrez and his DNA splash up. When you take him and you set him down, there's the tiniest of splashes.
Now, remember, the prosecution claims rope, duct tape, and a rug. A blood-saturated rug. And somehow, the only thing that splashed up when he put him in the van was a needle prick smudge of blood. Does that seem likely to you? Or, as an alternative, you have heard that Mr. Guterres had Mr. Anderson's address. Now, we don't know if Mr. Guterres ever went there. But why don't we have the same standard as the prosecution does with the hole in, or the gap in the cell phone usage, where he wasn't answering, yada yada? Why doesn't that apply to Mr. Guterres as well? That did he have mysterious 4-hour holes in activity that couldn't be accounted for, where he could have gone, as actual evidence shows that he planned to go over there with Sadie's permission to break Mr. Anderson's leg. Or legs. What, if we are going by hypotheticals, what is it that says that Mr. Guterres didn't go out there, got into the car, and coughed? Heavy smoker, brown smudge. Let's continue.
It's on the passenger side, halfway up that console. There's the tiniest speck of a splash that falls off as you set Rosalio Gutierrez's body down. It's almost imperceptible, but it's there, and it's in exactly the same location as the cutout carpet as that body was stored. And in the end, it reveals much of what a jury needs to know. So, while Rosalio Gutierrez is still wet with blood, while that carpet is still wet with blood, before it dries, when it would still be wet enough to splash, because it's been seconds or a very few minutes since Rosalio Gutierrez shed that blood, that's when that speck of blood tumbles to that location in your van.
But misses everywhere else. And remember, now the prosecution claims that Mr. Anderson drove Mr. Guterres home. That's an hour's ride over roads in a hurry to get home, and somehow he managed that the blood-soaked rug, a bloody mess of a 270-pound man, didn't touch any other surface. Because, as the state's own lab techs testified, that van was not cleaned. At all. At all. They have the cut out third of a rug, and somehow in that car ride, that didn't move around. That didn't splash anywhere. Nothing. Does that seem probable to you? To me, no.
And because you planned it, you do exactly what we would expect you to do, right? You wore footwear, maybe the steel-toed boots that you borrowed from your grandpa working at the tree farm just a day before.
Maybe.
Maybe you wore those.
Maybe.
You took them off. You put on some other footwear. You, of course, have now taken off your gloves. You've taken off that outer garment, the same that same plaid, sort of very light.
The glove they found in the apartment, they never tested for anything. How about that?
Outer garment that both your daughter and Sadie say was the last thing they saw you wearing in the late afternoon on the very same day that Rosalio goes missing. So just about that they saw you wearing about 4 hours before, 4.5 hours before Rosalio's death. You take those items off, and of course you package them up. This is your plan. You're not going to operate your vehicles with those things still on you. You've planned this, just like you left your phone at home. And so an investigation that is hoping that you were not a planner, an investigation that was expecting that you were not prepared for those type of basic things, is never going to detect you in that situation. Right? Only things that are going to detect you are the things you could not have planned for, things you could not have intended. Now you get home right away. Okay? And I'm going to talk about the timing in a few minutes here and how absolutely.
This is why the prosecution says blitz attack. Because that is the only way. And we are talking about a timeline where a minute off makes the timeline improbable. He has to drive there, do this in hope that Mr. Guterres is home, manage to do all that the prosecution says without leaving DNA anywhere, manage to carry a 270-pound man without leaving any trace or driplets or anything on the way to the car or the van, dumping him in a way that managed only as the tiniest smudge to get stuck on the side of the car. And during that car ride, the car ride the next day, nothing will be transferred anywhere else.
Impossible it would be for the timing to fit together this well and you'd be an innocent man. But you're home by 11:19 p.m. You've been radio silent. You've been off the grid for more than, for about almost 4 hours. Now you're on the phone. You're constantly on the phone from 11:19 to about 1 a.m. And so you are establishing your credibility and your bona fide that I've been here. Okay, just like your plan was. You got back home almost immediately so that you could be sure that if anybody ever looked at you, that you were accounted for in a way that was helpful to you.
Or he took a nap. He fell asleep. He had a work week. What's more probable?
But then after 1 o'clock, you're again off the grid for about 3 hours. Okay, now it's the middle of the night, so a lot of people are doing.
Wow. What could you do for a time period of 3 hours at night? You already had one nap, you woke up, you called, you went back to bed. Or you believe the prosecution.
Nothing during that period of time, right? But from 1 to 4, you're off the grid, and that gives you plenty of time to dispose of Rosalío Gutiérrez's body in the planned location and to do some of the cleanup. Now, maybe you're in a dark location. Maybe you can't do all the cleanup you wanted. Maybe you find that when...
So the cleanup he's talking about is getting rid of that third of the rug in the back of the van. But somehow it didn't include wiping off, cleaning the car. Does that make sense? It doesn't to me. My bet is still, not bet, but I believe it is more probable that Mr. Guterres went over there, got into the van, and coughed.
You start to do the cleanup, that some of the blood has actually saturated through whatever you thought was going to contain it, and it's actually seeped.
The rug? That he... Yeah.
Into part of the carpeting and matting in the back of your van. Okay? So maybe you are finding that plan A is not going to be exactly workable. And so maybe you didn't have the tools.
Oh, yeah. That rug is supposed to be 5 feet by 8. I wish I had a rug like that because I'm 6'3"-ish, 250 something. To roll me up in a rug like that, yes, you might fit me lengthwise. But then you had to have that's not a lot of room to roll up a body in. 5 feet by 8 feet rug. If it is that large.
For that bit of your preparation now not working perfectly. And so by 4 a.m., you are again trying to figure out where you can get cleaning materials early. And so you end up at Walmart and you buy more rubber gloves and more garbage bags and cleaning supplies, and you go to a location for 3 hours where it's people with family connections to you, it's a location you know no one else is going to be at, and you can finish your cleanup, again bagging all the items, again being meticulous about making sure that you don't leave any evidence, And of course, at your own house, over the next couple of days, you must run that fire pit and start to destroy some of the rest of the evidence.
He went to Walmart to buy 13-gallon garbage bags, cleaning wipes because it's COVID. He bought, I believe, a few cans of sardines for some reason. That doesn't speak hiding a body purchase to me. He's a construction worker. He does demolition. It's consistent with him doing his job, in my opinion.
Because even when you do the cleanup, right? Even when you do the cleanup, you are concerned that maybe the personal clothing that you are wearing will somehow be able to be tied to you, right? If somebody finds some of this stuff in a dumpster or buried somewhere or somewhere controlled, you can't leave your clothes, which is certainly going to have your DNA on it, right? Your pants, your socks, the boots you were wearing. You've got to get rid of those.
It certainly has your DNA on it. Another Freudian slip. He's supposed to say Mr. Guterres' DNA. But he doesn't.
In a way that is DNA proof. And you know how you do that? You do that with fire. You burn those things so that no DNA will ever exist. Okay, so that's why the burning pit is going on in the rainstorm for a couple of days. Because you're burning steel-toed boots. And we find at the very top of that burn pile.
I can't say this is the case here, but it's easier to contain a burn pit if it's raining. Because if it's bone dry, that fire can spread. So you have to make sure that that burn pit is contained. So in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. It almost is better to have a burn pit going if it is raining.
Steel toes and shoelaces, right? You burn your underwear, and we find a fragment of your underwear. You burn your jeans, and we find some buttons. And in fact, you might even burn 2 pairs of jeans, right? Because you might have changed jeans once from the time you committed the offense, and then when you did the cleaning of the van in that section.
Maybe.
Situation. So you might even you might even need to burn multiple pairs of jeans.
Maybe.
And you burn socks, right? The ones you wore when you wore those boots. And so at the very top of your fire pit, there's bleach, and there's those kind of clothes consistent with that set of garments that you could have. Okay? Those things are found in the fire pit. I want to talk.
Or this might just have been a poor circumstance. Why would you throw away your old clothes when there's a fire pit burning? You might as well burn it.
About some of the major witnesses in this case for just a second, because I think that they're I want to have you hear me talk about sort of how I think they responded on the stand and where they sit in terms of your ability to adopt what they have said. So I want to speak first about Sadie Beecham, okay, who was, I think in every way you heard her, right, on the stand, confronted on cross-examination, in her texts, on the phone when you heard recordings of her. She is part scared, part at wit's end. She is frustrated. There are times she is trying to appease and make nice with the defendant. There are times she's trying to just manage a conversation, just trying to say anything she can to end the endless string of texts or end the hours-long phone calls. And in the meantime, there are family issues, right? There are a couple things happening in their lives which do not allow her to cut off all contact with the defendant, do not allow her.
Well, you have a pissed off ex-boyfriend who finds out that you abandoned the kids to go to Mexico for a drunken stupor. And in these texts, you can go back if you are able to read those texts. And nowhere in those texts does she say, "It's over, I don't want to see you," except for when drop off the kids. That only happened on the stand. And this, yeah, let's continue.
To have some rule that says, you know, when I tell you you're not welcome in my house, that means you can never, ever be over here because I need help sometimes with my daughter. And so she is...
Like, are you staying over? XOXOXO. Yeah.
A woman just trying to have something of her own. She's trying to have some relationship in her life that is not about the defendant. And he deals with that with such obsession, with such hostility, with such fury, that she tries every strategy that anyone has ever come up with to try to deal with that. And that's exactly how you folks on the jury would expect someone who's being stalked and who is being dealt with in that way day after day to behave.
Now, this stalking bit, depending on the statute in the state of Wisconsin, I'm not sure what it is. To me, yes, you can find Mr. Anderson having a stalker-ish approach to this. But again, from both Sadie and Mr. Guterres, she says she wasn't afraid of him. Mr. Guterres says he is not worried. As far as I know, in Wisconsin, in order for it to be on the level of stalking, the alleged victims of the stalking must feel it can't be just annoyance. It has to be fear of life and health, or something of that effect.
Sometimes she wants to curse at him. Sometimes she wants to try to say nice things to see if that'll work. Sometimes she wants him out of her house. Sometimes she needs him to help on something. This is real, but it doesn't mean that it's not overwhelming, oppressive, and something.
It doesn't mean that.
That she is truly scared of. I want to talk about the daughter in this case, who now is 14.
The daughter who you're doxing over and over again. Yeah, you really care about the daughter, don't you? Freak.
14 years old, right? So you heard a 14-year-old who was, I think I'm going to call her sassy, who was courageous, who was absolutely adamant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, absolutely adamant about the things she told you. About things like that the back of that van was not cut out when I last saw the back of that van on the weekend of the 16th and 17th of May. Like that my father made me his...
That was something that she never testified about before her testimony, which coincidentally was after the owner of the construction site Mr. Anderson was working at said, "No, I didn't see a carpet back there." But a child who for years have been subjected to interviews and interrogations and who has changed her story every step of the way. I feel sorry for her, for the daughter. And I will tell you more about once we are done with this. I'm sorry that this might take a bit of time, but I want to be thorough. And please, in the comment section, tell me where you think I'm wrong, where I'm right, if I forget anything. Just tell me so I can learn from you as well. I know from the chats of other law tubers that you guys are amazing on picking up stuff that me and the other guys and girls are missing. So please, please don't be afraid to confront me.
Spy, that he stole things from the car. All of those things she said. She was adamant about those things. When challenged by the defense, she gave extra details that she remembered and she intoned and embraced.
Yeah, she gave extra details. She never said anything about until her testimony, which was after a few meetings with the district attorney.
Made it absolutely clear to you as a jury that she is her own person and that she knows what she is talking about. Now, is she perfect? Did she say exactly the same thing in exactly the same order as she did back in 2020? That would be impossible to do.
That exactly the same way, exactly the same order. It's not about that. It's her adding things she never talked about in interviews, and things she had changed, she has made a 180 about. That's the issue.
As a 12-year-old and now 14, of course, some time has passed, right? But as to everything that truly matters, you will see a couple of things that were inconsistent, and they will not be things that for you truly matter.
A couple of things that was inconsistent, like she was really sure about her dad never wearing Levi's. She was as sure of that as she was sure of anything else, and she was provably wrong.
Was she coached? Was any of what she did something where an adult has ordered her or dominated her to provide that information? I would suggest to you she's the exact opposite of the personality of some 14-year-old who can be coached in terms of what she will say.
Just a 14-year-old, maybe. But this has been going on for almost 3 years.
Exact opposite. I want to talk about Marquand Washington, the inmate who came and told you what the defendant told him when they had a cell together for about a little more than 5 weeks. And I want to contrast him with Mr. McIntyre.
Okay, I won't bother you with this part, but this is the prosecution doing everything he can to bolster Mr. Washington's testimony. Everything. And it is hard to watch, because it reeks, in my opinion, of desperation from the prosecution. And it goes on for a long time. And that tells me that is what he's most afraid of from the jury, for the jury to say, we don't believe that prison snitch at all. And in my opinion, they shouldn't. I don't believe anything Mr. Washington said. Not one bit. Let's skip forward a bit.
The same tier. So
It's still going on.
murdered on May 17th, 2000. Organized. We talked about what the evidence is. Also tell you, so now you also know, again, undisputed, it's the DNA. Right? So you have Lisa Treffinger, Ron Watucky, and Julie Avila. You have more than 70 years experience at the state crime.
It took him
all three of them tell you
a good 10 minutes
there's no competing evidence in this case
of trying to defend Mr. Washington's testimony.
That stain in that van, okay, it's A1 in their lab stuff, right? A1, that stain in the van of the defendants, is blood. Every one of them offered you the opinion it's blood.
And this is what I told you about what a fact I got wrong in my mock closing argument. Yes, they agreed on it being Mr. Guterres' DNA. But as I claim, it is equally probable that Mr. Guterres went to Mr. Anderson's place and coughed. Because what the prosecution says is that despite this blood-soaked rug being tossed around in the back of a van, driving fast, driving back to Mr. Anderson's home, to Walmart, everything of that, and nothing but that's much managed to escape.
70 years of experience, okay? People who go to crime scenes as their job every day over many of the years of their careers, okay? 3 different experts tell you it's blood. 2 of them also tell you, so now you also know, again, undisputed, it's the DNA of Rosalio Gutierrez. So it's blood, and it's undisputed evidence in this case that that is the DNA of Rosalio Gutierrez. Lisa Treffinger, an expert on this field, tells you that she did the testing. Ronald Watucky, who reviewed those findings, told you about his conclusions about this case. And then two of these three experts are asked, and so now this is Ron Watucky and Julie Avila. What else can you tell us about this speck, this red brownish speck in the vein?
And despite not being able to test it, they claim it was blood. Now, only one of them said she was positive it was blood without testing it. The other one made his opinion clear that it was probably blood, but he couldn't exclude something else. For example, my example of Mr. Gutierrez coughing up a bit of a smoker's lung. That is brownish, and it contains his DNA.
And those two individuals, Ronald Watucky, who's been working at the state crime lab since before they started doing DNA, and Julie Avila, who has 22 years there, said, we've seen lots of blood. Not only does it look like blood, but it looks like it is splashed on there. In other words, it is not transferred blood. Again, this is their expert opinion. It hasn't been...
Remember, these are lab technicians. They are not blood spatter experts. They were not sworn in as blood spatter experts. Their opinion matters. But I believe there's a reason why the prosecution didn't call a blood spatter expert on any of these spatter patterns in the apartment and this. It wouldn't surprise me if they tried to find an expert. They just couldn't find one who told them what they wanted.
Smudged on there or wiped on there. It's not, in other words, something someone planted there. It's splashed on. When that blood was still wet, it's splashed on.
Yeah, and that pool in the apartment was still wet 2 days later. It doesn't take 2 days for blood to dry up, in my opinion. I'm not an expert, but then again, the state didn't call an expert either.
Three crime lab analysts give you such important evidence in this case. Okay, so we talked about how this evidence is organized. We talked about what the evidence is. The burden of proof is on the state in each and every aspect of this case. Okay, so in no way let any argument I have said in any way, shape, or form indicate to you that there's any other burden of proof but the state of Wisconsin, each and every element. You're allowed to consider the evidence and organize the evidence in any way you want, right? You can think about it and organize it as a group and in your own minds in any way you want. And I'm going to ask you to think about the evidence in this way as one of the ways you do consider it. Could all of the things I'm now going to go through, could all of them be true for an innocent man who is falsely accused?
And now, the prosecution goes into a tirade which I find extremely troubling. He walks the line of shifting the burden of proof, where he says, as he stated, would this happen to an innocent man falsely accused? And he goes into example after example, including things that if Mr. Anderson just had done this, if Mr. Anderson just have said this, if Mr. Anderson just have shown this. To me, that is over the line. But I've heard other people in the LawTube segment of YouTube say he's walking the line. But to me, this is a shifting of burden of proof, because the defense and Mr. Anderson has no obligation whatsoever to provide the cops, the prosecution, with anything. It's their job and their job alone to show evidence. And this is roughly an hour into the prosecution's closing argument, and the rest of his closing argument is that tirade, where I claim that he is walking the line of shifting the burden of proof and overstepping it. Now you can go and watch from 1 hour and 33 minutes into day 15 of the Wisconsin versus Zachariah Anderson-Trial and watch that for yourself. But I've seen it a few times and I honestly can't be bothered with it. So that is my opinion about the state's closing argument. It is highly speculative. Some of the things the prosecution says has not been testified to. He is actively defending a prison snitch who has everything to gain by lying. And as you might have seen in the trial, in the defense case, they brought forward another prison snitch who countered the first prison snitch testimony. And at best, they cancel each other out, in my opinion. For me, the second prison snitch, Mr. McAtee, was more believable because he had nothing to gain from his testimony. But on contrary, he had a lot to lose by showing himself. That is my opinion about the state's closing argument. But I have to say this. I don't know how the jury reacts to this in this environment. The prosecution has worked there for a lot of years and probably knows what works and what doesn't. So you don't know. But in my opinion, for me, even after his closing arguments, we are nowhere near the evidence needed to convict Mr. Anderson for murder. Maybe for stalking of Miss Beecham. Mr. Guterres' own text says he wasn't scared. He had no worries. He even planned to confront Mr. Anderson. That doesn't say scared of the stalker to me. So at best, I believe the prosecution has a case for stalking of Miss Guterres. At best. I hope you enjoyed this. If the jury takes another day to deliberate, I will do a part 2 of this where now you probably already know what my opinion will be about the defense closing argument. But if you want me to, comment below. And you all have a nice day. I'll talk to you later.